My name is Margaret Ellis. I'm 41. 4 years ago, I left a promotion I had spent 6 years working toward to become the full-time caregiver for my father-in-law, a man named Bernard Ellis, who was diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's disease in the winter I turned 37. I left the promotion voluntarily. I restructured my hours, declined the title, watched a colleague step into the role I had built the groundwork for, and told myself and everyone around me that family came first and that I had made peace with the choice. I had not made peace with the choice. I had made the choice because my husband Daniel and his brother Kevin had a quiet, unspoken, thoroughly efficient conversation in which it was determined that someone needed to step back from their career to manage Bernard's care, and that someone was not going to be Kevin, who ran a logistics company in Phoenix and had quarterly targets, and was not going to be Daniel, who was a litigation attorney and had trials, and was therefore going to be me, who was a senior project manager at a healthcare consulting firm and had, apparently, more flexibility. 4 years of driving Bernard to appointments. 4 years of managing his medications and his specialists and his physical therapy schedule and his insurance claims and the specific administrative burden of keeping a person with a progressive neurological condition on the right side of every system that is supposed to support them, but requires a full-time advocate to actually function. 4 years of watching my own career recede in the rearview mirror while Daniel tried cases and Kevin hit his quarterly targets and Bernard's condition progressed the way Parkinson's progresses, slowly and then less slowly, and then in ways that required more than I had anticipated when I made the choice. Bernard died 14 months ago. He left his estate to his 2 sons equally. He left me a card. A handwritten card, kind and warm, that said he didn't know what they would have done without me and that he hoped I knew how much it meant. The estate was valued at one point at $1 million. Daniel received $550,000. Kevin received $550,000. I received the card. Before I tell you what happened when I found out, please take a moment to like and subscribe. Only if this story is already sitting somewhere real inside you. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I read every single one. Now let me take you back to the beginning. I need to tell you about Bernard before I tell you about the money, because understanding Bernard is essential to understanding everything that followed. Bernard Ellis was a good man. I want to say that clearly and first because the rest of this story is complicated, and I don't want the complication to obscure the fundamental truth of who he was. He was a retired civil engineer who had spent 40 years building bridges and overpasses and underpasses across the Midwest. A man who understood load-bearing structures the way I understand project timelines, intuitively and completely, with the specific satisfaction of someone who has spent a lifetime making things hold. He was dry and precise and occasionally funny in the way of people who are funny without trying to be, who say the exact true thing at the exact right moment, and then look mildly surprised by the laughter it produces. He loved his sons with the particular pride of a man who had raised 2 capable boys and watched them become capable men and considered that the successful outcome of his life's most important project. He did not, I think, fully understand the weight that project placed on the woman who married the more convenient of his sons. Daniel and Kevin were raised by a father who solved problems and a mother who managed them. And their mother, Patricia, had died 12 years before the Parkinson's diagnosis, which meant that when Bernard's condition required management, there was no woman in the original family structure to absorb the work. The logic of absorption traveled along the line of least resistance, which in this family, as in most families that have not explicitly examined these things, meant it traveled toward the daughter-in-law. Me. Not because anyone said explicitly, "Margaret, this is your job," but because Daniel mentioned once, carefully, that Kevin had the quarterly targets and the Phoenix office, and because no one else mentioned anything at all, and because I am the kind of person who fills a silence when the silence contains a need. I should tell you about the promotion I didn't take before I tell you what happened after Bernard died, because the promotion is the financial center of this story even though it doesn't look like it from the outside. The role was Director of Client Strategy at the firm where I had been a senior project manager for 6 years. It was not a minor step. It was the step. The one I had been building toward since I joined the firm at 31. The one that comes with a title and a team and a salary that would have been 40% higher than what I was making, and a trajectory that would have taken me, based on what I understood about the firm's growth plans, into a vice president conversation within 3 years. I had been unofficially identified as the internal candidate. My manager had told me, not in those words, but in the specific language of performance reviews and project assignments and the way she introduced me in executive meetings, that the role was going to be mine if I wanted it. I wanted it. And then Bernard was diagnosed, and Daniel came home from the first neurology appointment with a folder of information about Parkinson's progression and a look on his face that I recognized as the look of a man who has just been confronted with something large and is hoping someone else will take the first step toward managing it. I took the step. I called my manager the following week and explained the family situation and said I needed to restructure my role. She was kind. She was disappointed. She gave me 6 months at reduced hours with a reduced project load, and at the end of 6 months, it was clear that what Bernard needed was not a person with a reduced project load, but a person whose primary project was him. I stepped back from the director track entirely. My colleague Joanna took the role. She has been excellent in it. I have tracked her trajectory with the specific, bittersweet attention of a person watching someone else run a race they trained for. Daniel said, more than once, that he would make it right, that the sacrifice was temporary, that when things stabilized, when Bernard's condition found a plateau, when Kevin came back into a more active role, things would rebalance. Things did not rebalance. Kevin came to Seattle twice a year, for a long weekend each time, during which he was attentive and present and genuinely helpful, and also clearly relieved to be leaving when the weekend ended. Daniel continued his practice. The trials did not stop. The billable hours did not decrease. And Bernard's condition progressed the way the neurologist had told us it would progress, which is to say it did not find a plateau. It found the next stage, and then the next, and each stage required more than the one before, and the person who managed more was me. I want to give you numbers because I am a project manager, and numbers are how I understand things. And I think you should understand this in numbers before you understand it in feelings. Over 4 years of caregiving, I drove Bernard to 312 medical appointments. I managed interactions with 9 different specialists. I filed 47 insurance appeals, of which 31 were approved after my intervention and would not have been approved without it. I coordinated 4 transitions of care, the last of which involved moving Bernard into a memory care facility, which took 3 months of research and visits and conversations with social workers and insurance coordinators, and which I managed while working reduced hours and managing my own household and attempting, with decreasing success, to maintain the version of myself that existed before I became a caregiver primarily. I lost 4 years of director-level salary, which at 40% above my actual salary for 4 years represents approximately $280,000 in foregone income before taxes. I lost the trajectory. The vice president conversation that would have happened within 3 years of taking the director role. The network that builds at that level. The specific kind of professional credibility that accumulates only with time and cannot be recovered by catching up later because the people who stayed on the track are now a level above, and the gap does not close easily. I did not make these calculations while Bernard was alive. I want to be honest about that. I made them after he died, after the estate reading. After I understood that the $1.1 million that Bernard had spent his career building had been divided between his 2 sons with the specificity of equal shares, and that my 4 years of work had been compensated with a card that said he didn't know what they would have done without me. The estate reading was in an attorney's office in downtown Seattle. Daniel and Kevin and I and the attorney, a man named Hal Brent, who had known Bernard for 20 years. Hal read the will in the careful, unhurried way of attorneys who understand that the room is never just about the assets. The house, to be sold with proceeds divided equally between Daniel and Kevin. The investment accounts, divided equally. The savings, divided equally. Personal effects per the attached schedule. And at the bottom of the document, a handwritten codicil in Bernard's own writing, added in the last year of his life. He left me his mother's pearl earrings, which were beautiful and which I still wear, and a note that said, "For Margaret, who gave us all more than we deserved, with love and gratitude." Kevin cried. He is not a cold man, Kevin. He cried the way people cry when they are genuinely grieving and also genuinely relieved that the hard part is over, and the part of grief that requires you to sit with what you owe, someone is still ahead and you haven't arrived there yet. Daniel put his hand on my knee. I looked at the hand. I looked at Hal Brent's face, which had the careful, neutral expression of a man who has read many wills and understood that the room he was sitting in had just become complicated. And I felt something I had not felt during 4 years of appointments and appeals and care transitions and the slow particular grief of watching someone you love diminish. I felt very clearly and very specifically the shape of what I had given and the shape of what I had received, and the gap between those two shapes, which was large and which had a number, and which I was, for the first time, allowing myself to see in full. I did not say anything in the attorney's office. I said very little on the drive home. Daniel was talking about Bernard, about specific memories, about the civil engineering project Bernard had been most proud of. A bridge over the Deschutes River in Oregon that he had driven across once specifically to see it standing. I listened. I drove. I thought about the pearl earrings and the card and $280,000 in foregone income and what it meant that a man who had spent his life understanding load-bearing structures had not, in the end, measured the weight that had been placed on me. That evening, after dinner, after Daniel had called Kevin, and the two of them had talked for 40 minutes about their father and the memories and the division of the personal effects, I sat at our kitchen table with a legal pad. I am not naturally a person who keeps score. I find the accounting of relationships to be fundamentally at odds with what relationships are supposed to be. But I had been telling myself that for 4 years, and I had used it as a reason not to look at what the score actually was. And I understood now that not looking had not prevented the score from accumulating. It had simply prevented me from knowing what it said. I made the list. Appointments, 312. Insurance appeals, 47. Care transitions, 4. Medications managed, 6 simultaneously at peak complexity. Specialists coordinated, 9. Nights I had stayed at Bernard's apartment or facility when his condition required overnight presence, 63. My own projects deprioritized or abandoned during that period, 11. Salary differential over 4 years, approximately $280,000. Career trajectory disruption, incalculable but real. I put the legal pad down. I looked at the wall of my kitchen. Daniel was in the other room on a call with a colleague about a case. The ordinary sounds of our ordinary evening continued around the specific, extraordinary weight of what I was sitting with. I called my friend Lynn the next morning. Lynn is a family law attorney and my closest friend from graduate school, and the person I call when I need to think something through with someone who will tell me what they actually think without softening it for my comfort. I told her everything: the will, the earrings, the card, the list. She listened without interrupting, which is the quality I value most in Lynn. Then she said, "Margaret, what do you want to do?" I said, "I don't know yet. I need to understand what options exist." She said, "In terms of the estate, your options are limited. You weren't a named beneficiary, and the will is clean. Contesting, it would be difficult and probably unsuccessful. What you actually have is a conversation with Daniel, not an estate dispute." I said, "What kind of conversation?" She said, "The kind where you tell your husband what the last 4 years cost you and ask him to reckon with that in a real and financial way, not just an emotional one." I said, "What does that look like financially?" She said, "That's between you and Daniel. But Margaret, you gave up $280,000 in foregone income to care for his father. His brother contributed 2 weekends a year. Both of them just received $550,000 each. The math is not subtle." I said, I know. She said, "The question is whether Daniel knows." I drove home that afternoon thinking about whether Daniel knew. Not whether he understood abstractly that I had sacrificed. He understood that. He had said many times that he was grateful, that he knew how much I had given up, that he didn't know what they would have done without me. The same words as Bernard's card, almost exactly. A family of men who knew how to acknowledge a debt without calculating its size. The question Lynn was asking was different. It was whether Daniel had looked at the number, whether he had sat at his own kitchen table with his own legal pad and done the arithmetic the way I had done it, whether he had put the foregoing income next to the inheritance figure and understood, in the specific language of numbers rather than the general language of gratitude, what those two things said about the distribution of cost and benefit across our family in the 4 years of Bernard's illness. I did not think he had. I thought he had not done it because doing it would require him to arrive at a conclusion he was not prepared to act on. And men who are not prepared to act on a conclusion sometimes choose not to arrive at it. I was going to make him arrive at it. I chose a Sunday. Not an arbitrary Sunday. The Sunday 3 weeks after the estate reading, enough time for the acute grief to settle into something that could be discussed without the conversation being swallowed by it. I made dinner. Good dinner. The kind that signals this is a real evening and not a crisis. We ate. We talked about the week, about a case he was working on, about plans for the following month. And after dinner, when the table was cleared and the kitchen was quiet, I put the legal pad on the table between us. I said, "Daniel, I need to talk to you about something. Not Bernard. About us. About the last 4 years and what they cost and what I think needs to happen now." He looked at the legal pad. He looked at me. He is a litigation attorney. He knows what it means when someone puts a document on the table. He said, "Okay." I said, "I'm going to tell you some numbers. I need you to hear them without responding until I'm done. Can you do that?" He said, "Yes." I read him the list. All of it. The appointments and the appeals and the transitions and the nights and the foregone income. I read it the way I would present a project summary. Clearly and without editorializing, letting the numbers make the argument rather than my voice. When I finished, I put the legal pad down and I said, $280,000 in foregone income, roughly, over 4 years. That is what I estimate I sacrificed to provide care that neither you nor Kevin provided. He was quiet. He is not a quiet man by nature. The quiet had a texture to it that I recognized as someone holding several things at once and not yet sure which one to put down first. He said, "Margaret?" I said, "Let me finish. Kevin received $550,000 from your father's estate. You received $550,000. I received a card and a pair of pearl earrings that I love and that are not a financial instrument. I am not saying your father was wrong to leave his estate to his sons. It was his estate and his choice, and I am not contesting it, and I would not contest it. But I am saying that in the 4 years of his illness, the labor of his care was distributed radically unequally, and the financial benefit of his estate was distributed equally between the two people who did not provide that labor. And I need you to sit with what that means." He said, "I know what it means." I said, "Then say it out loud." A long pause. Then he said, "It means you paid for Kevin's inheritance." I said, "Yes." He said, "And mine." I said, "Yes." He was quiet again for a longer time. Outside the kitchen window, the city was doing its evening things. A dog barking somewhere. The specific quality of April light going orange at the edges. He said, "What do you want, Margaret? Tell me specifically." I said, "I want 2 things. First, I want you to talk to Kevin. Not to accuse him or make a scene. To tell him what I've told you tonight. To let him understand what the 4 years actually looked like from the person who lived them. Second, I want us to have a real financial conversation about what the last 4 years cost me and what a fair response to that looks like in the context of our marriage." He said, "You mean money." I said, I mean equity, which sometimes looks like money, yes. He said, Kevin is not going to give you money from the inheritance. I said, I'm not asking Kevin for anything. Kevin's relationship with what happened is between Kevin and his own conscience. What I'm asking for is a conversation between you and me about the fact that I gave up $280,000 in career income to care for your father, and that the financial benefit of your father's estate came to you in full while the cost of his care came to me in full, and that those two facts together represent something that our marriage needs to reckon with. He looked at the legal pad for a long time. Then he said, You're right. He said it simply, not defensively, not as a preamble to a qualification. Just, you're right. It was the sentence I had not been sure he was capable of saying, and the saying of it changed the temperature of the room. I said, I know. He said, I'm sorry, Margaret. I let you carry something that wasn't yours to carry alone. I told myself you had chosen it and that you were okay with it, and I didn't ask often enough whether either of those things was still true. I said, I chose it the first time. After that, I was too far in to unchose it. He said, I should have seen that. I said, yes. The conversation that followed lasted 2.5 hours. It covered the 4 years in detail that we had never covered while they were happening. The way crisis conversations rarely happen during the crisis and only become possible after the acute phase has passed, and the people involved have the space to look at what they survived and understand its true shape. Daniel talked about the period differently than I expected. He had not been absent in his own mind. He had been managing what he understood as his contribution, which was financial stability, which he had provided, and emotional support, which he believed he had provided, and which I had experienced less consistently than he believed. We had the conversation where two people discover they have been living adjacent realities in the same house, which is one of the most disorienting conversations a marriage can contain, and which is also one of the most necessary. We talked about money. Specifically, clearly, without sentimentality. Daniel had received $550,000. He had also had an attorney's salary for 4 years, while I had had a reduced project manager salary. He proposed, that evening, that he transfer $150,000 from the inheritance to a financial instrument of my choosing to be mine entirely as an acknowledgement of the income differential and the career disruption. He said it was not enough. I said I knew it was not enough. He said it was what felt honest to him and that he would do more if I told him more was right. I said, let me think about it. I thought about it for 2 weeks. I talked to Lynn, who said, Margaret, that's a real offer from a man who understands what he's doing. I talked to a financial advisor. I thought about the number and what it meant, not as a settlement of a debt, but as an act of recognition. As Daniel said, in the specific language of numbers rather than the general language of gratitude, I see what this cost you, and I am prepared to name it. I said yes to the $150, with one condition, that Daniel would call Kevin and have the conversation, not to extract money from Kevin, not to create a confrontation or a scene, but because I needed Kevin to know. I needed the person who had spent 4 years contributing 2 weekends and receiving $550,000 to sit with a phone call from his brother and understand what the distribution of labor had actually looked like, what it had cost, who had paid it. Daniel called Kevin on a Thursday evening. He told me about the call afterward, in detail, the way he recounts things when he wants me to understand that he did it right. Kevin had been quiet for a long time. Then Kevin had said, I didn't think about it that way. Then Kevin had said, I should have done more. Then Kevin had said, what can I do now? Daniel had told him, honestly, that the financial piece was being handled between Daniel and me, and that what I needed from Kevin was acknowledgement and a change in how he understood the 4 years. Kevin had said he understood. Kevin called me the following Saturday. He called me at 10 in the morning, which is not the time you call someone when you are managing an obligation. It is the time you call someone when you have thought about it overnight, and the thinking has arrived somewhere real, and you are ready to say it. He said, Margaret, I've been thinking about what Daniel told me. I said, okay. He said, I didn't understand what those 4 years looked like for you. I told myself you had it managed, that you were okay with the arrangement, that if it had been too much, you would have said something. I said, I know. He said, I should have asked. I should have come more. I should have thought about what we were asking you to absorb instead of being grateful that I didn't have to absorb it myself. I said, yes, all of that. He said, I'm sorry, Margaret. I mean that directly, not as a formality. I'm sorry. I said, I know you are. I believe you, he said. Is there anything I can do? I said, you've done the thing that matters most. You called me, and you said it plainly. We talked for an hour about Bernard, about the 4 years, about a few specific memories from the care period that I had not told Daniel about, because they were the kind of thing you carry alone when you are the person who is present and the people who love you are not. Kevin listened to those stories with the attention of someone who understands he is hearing something he would not otherwise know, and who is allowing the weight of that to land rather than protecting himself from it. It was a real conversation, perhaps the most real one Kevin and I had ever had. I want to tell you what happened with my career, because it is the part that I fought for myself and that no one could give me. The $150,000 from Daniel was real and significant, and I am grateful for it in the specific way I am grateful for things that are hard and true rather than easy and approximate. But it did not give me back the 4 years or the director role or the trajectory I had been on. What happened with my career was something I had to rebuild myself from where I was, with what I had at 39 instead of 35, which is nothing but is also not the same. I called my old manager, a woman named Helen, 8 months after Bernard died. Helen had moved to a different firm by then, a larger healthcare consulting company that was building out its client strategy function, which meant she was in the specific position of someone who needed experienced people and was less constrained by internal hierarchy than she would have been at the old firm. I told her I was looking to return to a director-level track. I told her what the 4 years had contained, not apologetically, not as a gap to be explained away, but as experience. Managing complex care systems, navigating insurance structures, coordinating multidisciplinary teams under pressure and with limited resources. These are project management skills. They are transferable. They are, in the healthcare consulting space, directly relevant. Helen saw them that way. She offered me a director of healthcare operations role at a salary that was slightly above what the original director role would have paid me 4 years earlier. I took it. I started in January. I have been in the role for 8 months, and I am good at it, and I am building something again, and the floor under my feet feels more solid than it has in 4 years. I am not going to tell you that everything is repaired. Daniel and I are in couples therapy, which was my condition for the financial arrangement, and which he agreed to without negotiation, which I took as its own kind of acknowledgement. We are doing the work. Some of it is hard, and some of it is recalibrating things that have been miscalibrated for longer than the 4 caregiving years. The underlying assumptions about whose career mattered more, whose time was more flexible, who absorbed the household load that expanded to fill the space created by my reduced work hours. Those conversations do not have a clean endpoint. They have a direction. The direction is honest, and I am willing to walk it. Kevin came to Seattle for Thanksgiving, not a long weekend. 10 days. He cooked for the first time in memory. He asked about my work and listened when I answered. He took Daniel out for a long walk one afternoon, and I do not know what they talked about, but Daniel came home different, the specific differentness of someone who has been seen by his brother in a new way. Some things shift slowly. Some shifts take a single conversation. The Thanksgiving visit was both. I want to talk to you directly now. Wherever you are, whatever time it is. I spent 4 years caring for my father-in-law because I was the person for whom the cost was considered most acceptable. Not because I was the most capable, though I am capable. Not because I was the most available, though the system arranged it so that I appeared to be. because I was the one who would absorb it without making it a problem. The good daughter-in-law, the competent one, the one who had it handled. I have been thinking since all of this happened about what it means to have it handled. The phrase is used as a compliment in families the way my family uses it. You've always handled things so well, Margaret. But handling things has a cost. Every project I didn't take because Bernard had an appointment. Every professional relationship I didn't build because I was on the phone with an insurance company. Every morning I spent driving to the facility instead of working on the work that would have built the career that would have built the future. Those costs are real. They compound. And they are invisible unless you make them visible by sitting at a kitchen table with a legal pad and adding them up in a column that does not lie. You are allowed to add it up. You are allowed to sit with the number. You are allowed to put the legal pad on the kitchen table and say, this is what it cost, and this is what a fair response looks like, and I need you to tell me what that response is going to be. That is not a threat. That is an accounting. And an accounting is the most honest thing you can do in a relationship that has been running on assumption for too long. The pearl earrings are beautiful. I wear them often. They were Bernard's mother's, and they carry the weight of that, and I am glad to have them. But I am also glad to have the conversation I had with my husband at the kitchen table in April. The conversation where I put the numbers on the table and made the invisible visible and asked for a response that matched the size of the question. Not the card, not the gratitude, the response. That is today's story on the Family Ledger. Leave me a comment wherever you are. Tell me what time it is. Tell me if you have ever been the person who handled it, who absorbed it, who was told you were capable enough that the help could go somewhere else, and whether you ever made the cost visible. I read every single one. Subscribe for the next story every week. Check the description for another one I think you will connect with. Thank you for being here. It means more than I can say.